Hey, it's your super annoying combat sports host here. Thank you to all the new subscribers. We just recently breached 300, so that's pretty cool. I mean, it's 300 subscribers from now, but I mean, I feel like we're going to get bigger as time goes on. Like, I'm very, very confident in how this channel can grow. I've been delegating on how to make this video for a while. Obviously, I'm going to be talking about, since you guys saw the title to this video, UFC 300, UFC 299, and the Bellator and PFL champion versus champion card, and just giving my thoughts. I didn't want to be a guy, and I never want to be a guy that comes on here and just, says something for the sake of saying it, for the sake of having some sort of a different take. It's just going to be my general and honest thoughts about what the MMA community is saying about these cards, because it's very interesting, man. 299 is looking stacked. 300 isn't bad, but I also don't think it's great, but I also don't think it's as bad as everyone says that it is. That Bellator and PFL card is interesting. It's interesting as to what's going to happen with PFL and Bellator now that they've been acquired by PFL. So let's talk about it. Now, first off, I want to talk about UFC 300. Just recently, Max Holloway, Justin Gaethje gets added to the card. That's a big fight. It's for the BMF title. One of those fights that definitely has wider implications, but let's not pretend like it isn't a fun fight. This is purely just two guys going in there, throwing down. Justin Gaethje's always a fun guy to watch, and of course Max Holloway is a fun guy to watch. A lot of people had their reservations about how that fight's going to go. Maybe I'll do a breakdown on that. I know I still have to do an AJ and Ngannou breakdown the next video, but it's something that's actually interesting. I was thinking about this right before I cut the video and I was recording it. A lot of fans have voiced their disappointment with UFC 300, and obviously it's a marquee event, right? Just the same as 200 was. If I'm remembering correctly, 200 actually really underperformed for expectations because Jones popped for steroids and Anderson Silva had to step in and fight Daniel Cormier, which turned out to be a kind of a pointless and needless fight. A lot of fans now, the MMA Guru included, up until this last Max Holloway fight was added, felt like this card was going to be a big underachiever. And I gotta be honest, looking at the card, especially in comparison to 299, it's a card. I mean, like, I feel like we obviously hold cards like this to higher standards because they're supposed to be special, right? But I guess what I want to ask off the bat is, should the MMA public, the MMA media, the MMA fans, should we switch our perspective? There's still a ton of really interesting fights on this card. I feel like if this was a regular card, this would be an absolute slapper on paper. The best way that I could describe this card, based off of what I've seen, would probably be like a beefed up MSG card. It does feel a little bit underwhelming for a special card like this under this occasion. That was my first thought. Then I thought about it more. There's been UFC 100, there's been UFC 200, and there's been UFC 300. That's 300 UFC events total, and then I think it goes back even further since they started chronologically numbering them. I think there's a few more events before that. I could be wrong, but out of the numbered events, there's 300 of them, and there's been 3 cards now that we fall on the centennials. So 100, 200, 300. That's basic math. I wonder how much we need to stop putting this card in the perspective that the UFC matchmakers are going to have these things 100% figured out. From the discourse I hear online, it seems like MMA fans, and I originally felt like this and I kind of had to recalibrate my brain. It seems like we as MMA fans put a lot of confidence in Dana to just automatically know what he's doing all the time. Dana, in my personal opinion, is a great fight promoter. They have some great matchmakers at the UFC. When they want to, they can cook up a hell of a card. And I think this is a very solid card. Again, we hold it to a higher standard because it's UFC 300 and there is something very big promised. This is a solid card, but I feel like some of the way it was handled and the large amount of promises we were given is what sometimes holds this card back. And that kind of plays into what I was saying before, right? We as the fans, we put a lot of faith in Dana, in Hunter Campbell, in the matchmakers to make fun and entertaining fights, especially for an event like this. But we shouldn't just automatically assume that they always know what to do, especially when this is UFC 300. Now, granted, they've had many, many years now to figure out the matchmaking process, to know what goes into making a great fight, and to know what the fans want to see. I just feel like we could be giving Dana a little bit more slack. It's gonna sound, I sound like such an industry plant for the UFC right now. I promise I'm not. But part of me thinks like, what if they are still trying to figure this out just the same that we are, right? Like we didn't, I mean, I know the public didn't know what to expect for UFC 300. That's a lot of pressure, man. That's a lot of pressure on Dana. He's got to think about it like this. He's got to make fights that make sense, one. Two, he's got to also make fights that are fun, like this BMF title fight between Max and Gaethje. That's a good mixture of making sense, but also being fun, right? So you can't just, I at least don't think you can have a full card of just fights that are fun to watch. There's so many things to consider with these cards. Do you put a lot of big names on the card? Do you use this card as kind of like because I know some of the divisions right now are absolutely log jammed. Do you take this time to put a lot of big names on that card to kind of unlog jam some of these divisions as well as make fun fights, right? What I'm trying to say is there's a lot of different aspects to consider when making a card such like UFC 300. And I will say we need to be more considerate, I feel like, of Dana. I mean, I've commentated for more amateur regional shows, and there is a ton that goes into matchmaking on that stage where there aren't really, I mean, there are contracts, but we're not talking about like thousands or millions of dollars, right? So I can only imagine how much goes into matchmaking at the next level. There's so much more to consider than just making crazy fights. And I feel like a lot of the public just expected Dana to like sandwich together these fire fights and just like, boom, fuck the complications, fuck the repercussions of putting these two guys together, boom. Like for instance, Deiveson Figueiredo and Cody Garbrandt, that's a fun fight, but that's also a fight that I want to see for the implications because Deiveson Figueiredo, it's going to be his second fight up a weight class, right? And for Cody Garbrandt, he recently has gotten himself out of this skid that he's been having on his career, and he had a really nice knockout of Brian Kelleher. I want to see how he does. That's an intriguing fight, and that's a fight that also has wider implications for the division. So yeah, that's my thoughts on 300. We could talk about 299 if we want. I mean, it's going to be a stacked card regardless. That's in Miami. I almost wanted to fly out there and go to that one myself, but I mean, that's a really, really nice card, right? And that's something, you know what? I will take this a step further and say that if 299 was 300, people would be complaining as well. Again, we have to think comparatively, right? 299 is great for a card that's not a monumentous occasion like 300 is. 299 is a really, really exciting and solid card that we have regular expectations for. Either way, though, I'm super duper excited for that one. And then we've got the PFL champion versus champions matchup. I know the PFL owner Don Davis came out and kind of took a shot at that canceled March card for Saudi Arabia with the UFC. Listen, PFL is becoming way more, I think, of a viable option for MMA fans. Do I think that they have the level of or the caliber of athlete that UFC does yet? Absolutely not. Do I think that they have the credibility that UFC does yet? Absolutely not. Are they the best competition for the UFC? I think at current, yes, because they bought out Bellator. Bellator was not really going to be competing with UFC, I don't think, anytime soon. But Bellator did have a ton of names, and that's why I do think it's very, very smart that they're doing the champions versus champions card. It is a little bit tricky because we talk about this on the channel a lot, you know, not wasting all of your name talent on one card. Kind of goes back to what we were just talking about with 300. So if you're doing champions versus champions, that means that one champion stock has to kind of depreciate while the others go up. But I mean, it's large enough of a sample size, and I already see some notable names in there to where it should be okay. Now, whether or not the UFC canceled this March card because of PFL or because of the Ngannou and AJ fight, I couldn't tell you, but from what I've seen from Dana, I don't think he'd be the guy to cancel a card because of competition. I think he'd lean into it. In fact, I've seen tons of memes recently. Like Francis, and I've been seeing the memes where it's like Francis versus AJ gets announced, and then Dana White's like, you know what? Like Stipe is coming out. He's going to fight Daniel Cormier, John Jones, and you know, like, you know what I mean? Like one of those super cards. I don't buy necessarily the fact that Dana is going to be bending at the knee to these promotions to say like, oh yeah, we need to like cancel this card because I don't know if we're going to be able to compete. Like, if I'm being honest, PFL is not at that level yet. And even if they were, I just know the way that Dana White, or at least I've seen the way Dana White talks about the competition, and he's not a guy I feel like that scares easily. So super duper excited, I think, for the scene of MMA. This is going to be great. Boxing's having a resurgence with this Francis versus AJ fight. We're going to do a tactical breakdown video on that soon, so stay tuned for that. And without further ado, guys, this has been your boy, the combat consultant, the soundboard god, Jacob Cooperman. And I'll see you in the next one. Deuces.